Hi! Remember me? Yes, it's been a few months. It's been a while since I've uploaded a new video to the curious listener. I talked a couple videos ago about the struggles that I am battling, and I'm not going to rehash any of that here. You can go back and watch me gripe about those things there. I said enough about it there, and I will say nothing more of it here. But I will say that the thing that has brought me back is that hours ago, I just returned home from having watched Back to Black, the Amy Winehouse biopic released yesterday. My last video for the curious listener was, in fact, about the back-to-back trailer that had come out at that time, around January. And to me, the trailer showed some promise while also awakening within me the many anxieties that I have come to feel and associate with the music biopic, the biopic about a truly great musical artist, musician, or songwriter, a musical act that has had seismic impact on modern popular music. And it's these overarching figures in music history that Hollywood now routinely does such a tragic disservice with one bland, superficial, rushed, surface-level treatment of the lives of these people in these music biopics. It's gotten to the point where I don't understand why Hollywood wants to continue doing this to itself. Why? I don't understand why a town that's supposed to be laden with storytellers, laden with screenwriters who are either hugely established or desperately aspiring for someone to give them their break, and there are plenty among that lot who could really tell a great story. People who are aching for that chance to show their chops on a platform as grand as the one occupied by a music biopic about someone as legendary, as rich with complexity and human tragedy as Amy Winehouse, who has been dead now for 13 years, died almost 13 years in July 23rd, 2011. Yes, at the age of 27. The 27 Club, everyone wants to make this big deal out of. I almost wonder if to do so is to sensationalize the tragic. Robert Johnson died at age 27, the blues great. Then later on you had Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, you had Kurt Cobain, all these figures, Janis Joplin, right, Amy Winehouse, all dying at age 27. All these tormented musical geniuses dying at that tragically young age. As I mentioned in my last video about the Amy Winehouse biopic months before its release, at that point my video was just about anticipating its release. What were the concerns, some of them widespread among Amy Winehouse fans, about the film and how it would treat this subject, how it would present Amy Winehouse, to the extent to which it would be truthful to Amy Winehouse as a person, as a human being, in addition to Amy Winehouse, the songwriter, Amy Winehouse, the musician, Amy Winehouse, the jazz lover, Amy Winehouse, the lover of Lauryn Hill, Amy Winehouse, the addict, Amy Winehouse, the daughter, Amy Winehouse, the girlfriend, the lover to this boyfriend Blake that had such a destructive influence in her life. And one of the things I mentioned in that video, unfortunately, came true in all the worst ways in this film, which, by the way, at last check, has a 38% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It was at that point that I knew my worst fears about this film were almost certain to come true upon viewing it, and in fact, they did come true upon viewing it today. What are the common shortfalls of the biopic? I don't want to rehash at any great length the things that I went over in my last video. You can check that out on the Curious Listener, but just real quick. A couple pitfalls that tend to be associated with these music biopics these days that Hollywood is churning out at a factory-like pace. They'll gloss over the uglier or grittier aspects of the figure's life, okay? It will be a whitewash. It will tiptoe around certain portions of the person's story for a variety of reasons. Sometimes family has an undue influence in shaping the narrative of this person's life out of an effort, admirable and noble though it may be, to protect this person's image in the public, to soften perceptions of the person's rougher edges. But that does a disservice to what is supposed to be an artistic endeavor. Art can't be tortured into a particular shape. You can't shove that round peg through the square hole of your own desire to frame the narrative in a very specific way. You've got to let the subject breathe and be what it is. A lot of times these days you just don't see that in these music biopics that Hollywood's churning out. And then the other thing is, the second major pitfall of these music biopics is there's this idea that you have to just touch upon all of the highlights of this person's life. We must get in the drug addiction and the abusive boyfriend and the moment they signed their record deal, and in Amy Winehouse's case, then we got to get to the Grammy Awards night when she won the 5 Grammys, and we got to get to meeting Blake and this, that, and the other thing, and let's go pow 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 pow. We got to cover all this. Why? All you do is just cover bases with that approach to storytelling. This blow-by-blow account in telling the story of a woman, again, of such complexity, of such genius, as Amy Winehouse possessed, just makes for bland, boring storytelling. It makes for a decent, if not good, documentary, but this isn't supposed to be a documentary. By the way, there were 2 that preceded this biopic. So this is another question that comes up. Why did we need a third Amy Winehouse film within the mere 13 years since this woman's death? What is going on here? There was a documentary in 2015. There was a documentary in 2022. Now there's the biopic in 2024. What is the rush? As I mentioned in my last video, we live in this impatient society, made all the more impatient by the existence of platforms, devices, social media, text messaging that has hooked us on instant gratification. We text our girlfriend or our boyfriend. If we don't hear back in 30 seconds, oh my God! The transgression of that is in the moment unforgivable, right? And so Amy Winehouse, the Whitney Houston biopic that came out when Whitney Houston, I Want to Dance with Somebody, that one was called, as I talked about it in my last video. She hadn't even been dead for a decade. And now we get the biopic about Whitney Houston. It's macabre. What is wrong? As I also mentioned in my last video, when Kevin Spacey played the role of Bobby Darin in Beyond the Sea, the Bobby Darin biopic that came out in, 2004. That was 31 years after Bobby Darin died at age 37 in 1973, right? And that's about right. Can we at least let 30 years pass before we presume arrogantly to have summoned the objectivity needed to really present a musician's life with any degree of genuine insight that is unmoored from how a family might want this person to be perceived, anxieties among the person's fan base. I mean, what kind of a Bobby Darin fan base was there really in 2004? I love Bobby Darin, but probably not much, okay? Many people watching this video right now themselves personally remember watching Amy Winehouse win those 5 Grammys that night in the aftermath of the release of her great second record, Back to Black. With Rehab and Valerie and all that great stuff on there. We all remember watching her perform Rehab at times, skeletally thin. Her physical appearance worrisome, not just to the hounds among the paparazzi who pursued her to the grave, but also among the people who loved her and her work, the people who cared about her, the people in her inner circle, her dad, Mitch, who, by the way, is treated with a flattery, I would say, that I find to be suspicious. As I said in my last video, Mitch, her dad, had reportedly some influence over the framing of the narrative underlying this film, Back to Black. And so he had an interest in in sort of prettying up Amy Winehouse's story, and certainly has an interest in being portrayed himself as some kind of hero. But if you watch the documentaries, I believe it was the 2015 documentary that does not treat him with kid gloves at all. It doesn't demonize the man, but it certainly isn't going out of its way to make him the Pope either, which to some extent I almost feel like this film does. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle. My suspicion about Mitch, it's based on documentaries I've watched, things I've researched to do videos like this, is that there were at least times when Mitch was a little too interested in driving Winehouse back into the studio and cracking the whip on her to work when she really was in no shape to do so. Why? Because perhaps, like her boyfriend Blake, these people just wanted to be leeches, leeching off of her success, her genius, and the material fruits that it bore. I'm sorry, but that seems to be a bit closer to the truth of who her dad was than what we see in this biopic. So those are the big pitfalls with these music biopics. There are other biopics in the works, and at this point, I'm gravely concerned. You know, Selena Gomez is supposed to play the role of Linda Ronstadt in a Linda Ronstadt biopic. Timothy Chalamet is, as we speak, filming the Bob Dylan biopic in which he plays the role of Dylan. There's a Michael Jackson biopic coming out. I've even seen some stuff about a Bruce Springsteen biopic. When you start getting to artists, and Amy Winehouse is one of them, I mean, artists that are as substantive, distinctive, influential, impactful as these. I mean, Dylan, Springsteen, Michael Jackson, I mean, Linda Ronstadt, these are people of profound substance. And if you're going to treat their stories in as superficial a manner as that with which Amy Winehouse's story is treated in Back to Black, shame on Hollywood. What is the point? What are you doing? One disservice after another. These people changed lives. They changed the freaking world. It's not just about the music. I mean, Dylan won the Nobel Prize. Who in the history of modern popular music has done for it or to it what Michael Jackson did with Thriller in 1983 when I was a 4-year-old? And you're gonna, I mean, gosh, please tell me that's not gonna be yet another bland, rushed, unthinking, mindless, insipid race through the highlights from the studio to the courtroom and beyond, and the tree in which he gave an interview to what's his face, I forget that journalist's name. How shameful is that going to be? I mean, Timothy Chalamet is one of the hottest commodities in Hollywood right now, and he seems to be a rather wise choice to portray Dylan. But my God, I'm worried at this point. What are some? So, as I mentioned, there was a time, as I mentioned in my last video, when Hollywood had a handle on this. Go watch Sid and Nancy from 1986, Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols. Go watch, in my view, Oliver Stone's treatment of The Doors in 1991 with Val Kilmer playing the role of Jim Morrison. In Sid and Nancy, it's the brilliant Gary Oldman playing Sid Vicious. In 2004, equally brilliant Jamie Foxx portraying Ray Charles in the film Ray, for which he won the Best Actor Oscar. You have Joaquin Phoenix the following year playing Johnny Cash, and by the way, don't overlook Reese Witherspoon's role as June Carter Cash, as I mentioned in my last video. A terrific film. Control with Sam Riley playing Ian Curtis of Joy Division in 2007. These are about as good as the music biopic is going to get. Now, biopics aside, there was Brett Morgen's treatment of David Bowie in a documentary called Moon Age Daydream that was nominated for an Oscar in 2022. And what can be learned from the narrative structure of that documentary is he doesn't do the blow-by-blow, cradle-to-grave account of David Bowie's life. What he does is takes a slant angle at David Bowie's story. And I think it's that approach that really is the wisest take on a life as gargantuan as, in that case, David Bowie. Brett Morgen said in interviews, as I said in my last video, he was overwhelmed by the colossal, gargantuan archives that were just hoisted upon him when he agreed to accept the project of making this documentary about David Bowie. So overwhelmed the fact that he hardly knew what to do with all of it, what to feature and what to leave out, what to use and how to use it. And to some extent that comes out in the sort of ADD manner in which the narrative is sort of cut up and delivered. But nonetheless, I applaud Brett Morgen for saying, no, I'm not going to do this cradle-to-grave, blow-by-blow thing that these music biopics do, or even, for that matter, that many music documentaries do. I'm going to come at it from my own angle. I'm not going to be chained to some preconceived narrative structure. And with a guy like Bowie, who was this radiant intellect, in addition to being a creative genius, that's the perfect approach to an artist of his magnitude. What have been the mediocre biopics that Hollywood has churned out more recently? I don't know what it is about how Hollywood has lost its ability to deliver a biopic about a great musical artist with any degree of substance or authenticity or genuine curiosity even. But it's certainly been the case lately. Remember when Austin Butler played the role of Elvis in 2022? Some of the critical reviews spot on nailed what is broken about Hollywood's approach to the music biopic here in the 2020s. Todd Gilchrist at the AV Club said it was an impressionistic jumbled highlight reel of Elvis Presley's many accomplishments. Impressionistic jumbled highlight reel. Many music biopics that come out these days can be described as exactly that, and certainly Back to Black is no exception. There was another reviewer who said of the Elvis film of 2022 that it overlooks a lot of the horrible aspects of Elvis's legacy to create a version worthy of the big screen. Here we hear critic after critic in biopic after biopic absolutely nailing what's wrong and broken with Hollywood's approach to the music biopic today. Okay? Rushed, frenzied, hollow highlight reel, glossing over the ugly parts, sugarcoating a figure who is of immensely greater complexity than the film as it stands allows. I Want to Dance with Somebody, as I mentioned earlier, about the great Whitney Houston, someone whose work I grew up with. I love Whitney Houston's music. I rock out my 80s playlists on Spotify in my car all the time. And when Whitney comes on, it just brings joy to my body, you know? And it's so sad that the I Want to Dance with Somebody biopic about Whitney Houston fell so short of the mark. Listen to these reviews, and you're going to hear again and again the critics identifying the two key problems with Hollywood's approach to the music biopic today. The critics are panting for substance when it comes to the music biopic now. They are again and again calling Hollywood out on exactly the things that it's getting so tragically wrong with its treatment of these figures in their biopics about these great artists. One critic called I Want to Dance with Somebody another wiki biopic for posterity's sake. Watchable, but leaves you feeling like you were on stage with Whitney Houston, but didn't really get to dance with her. So well said. Another critic said, it's like the Spark Notes version of Houston's life, a smattering of collected moments that feel hollow, which is exactly what one could say of Back to Black. Amy Winehouse. It's chopped up in these very quick, sort of anxiety-ridden flashes of the highlights of Amy Winehouse's story without ever pausing over any of them to gaze at them longer than a minute and think about how that particular event in Amy Winehouse's life originated. What is it about the authentic self of Amy Winehouse's character that led to that outcome at that moment in her life? These questions are utterly beyond the scope of what this film is capable of. Another critic said of I Want to Dance with Somebody, instead of utilizing the biopic genre to reveal Houston's deeper emotionality, experiences, and relationships, this film often feels as though one is merely watching characters walk through a summary of her major life events. Another critic, lastly, said of I Want to Dance with Somebody, it is a doggedly formulaic biopic that fails to capture even a fraction of the electrifying sparkle of Houston at the peak of her powers. Well, there was an electrifying sparkle to Amy Winehouse at the peak of her powers too, and all I got was a dull facsimile of that in this 38% reviewed on Rotten Tomatoes Back to Black biopic. I saw promise after the trailer because Sam Taylor Johnson, the director, had previously directed in 2009 a film about John Lennon's early years called Nowhere Boy. That is one of the most tragic, most tortured childhoods in the history of rock and roll, John Lennon's. And for her to have tackled a subject like that and to have done it well enough as to have seen that film released to widely lauding reviews was a hopeful sign to me. She then, very next film was 50 Shades of Grey in 2015, which grossed $166 million. So what I learned about this director is, A, she can tell the story about a great musician with some craft and soul, and secondly, she also can manage a big budget film like a 50 Shades of Grey. She can crank out a film that can gross 170 million bucks. So she's got some versatility and dexterity as a director. Where did it all go wrong in Back to Black is a question I'm going to be pondering for a while, because it did. Some of the concerns before its release were, as I mentioned earlier, a mere 13 years after her death. Why? As Sean Collier in the Pittsburgh Magazine said of Back to Black tries to make us look back fondly on an era that's only barely over. Exactly. I mean, we're even going to rush nostalgia itself now. We're going to manufacture nostalgia. We're going to manufacture emotion in this hurried, rushed, and unthinking fashion. 13 years, listen, tell me I'm wrong, it's fine, but it just doesn't seem like it was that long ago. And we're already 3 films into Amy Winehouse's story. Again, 2 documentaries, 2015 and 2022. What is the rush beyond the moral indecency of that timing? How objective can we be a mere 13 years removed from Amy Winehouse's death? I talked about the pressures from the family, Mitch, her dad in particular. You see the residue of that in this film. The narrative seems to walk on eggshells here and there, and it's apparent in ways that really sort of sour the milk of this film. Some of the criticism that came out of Back to Black, I took a look at before I went to watch the film today, and I'm reading these reviews thinking, oh dear, this is not going to be good. This isn't going to go well. These critics are calling out exactly the same pitfalls that have dogged so many music biopics of late. And I'm going to be walking into just the latest example of a tragically bland treatment of a life that was anything but bland. Some of those critics said the following. There was Todd Jorgensen of Cinemalog who said that the film leans into formula rather than providing genuine insight. Agreed. The film seems reluctant to risk tarnishing the legacy of the late British singer. I said in my last video about this biopic months before its release, all we knew of it was its trailer at that point, that the family reportedly had an undue influence on this film, on the story that it was going to tell and how it was going to tell it, and what was one of the consequences of that going to be, well, we were going to get this prettified whitewashing of a story that is much more complicated than the film is capable of even fathoming. That's what Todd Jorgensen picked up on. We have Jonathan W. Hickman of the Noonan Times-Herald saying, Taylor Johnson's staid, flavorless, televisual storytelling approach is another in a long line of misguided attempts to translate a musical genius into the cinematic form. This is part of the problem, isn't it? When you're going to cram a life as sizable as Amy Winehouse's into a 90-minute or 120-minute formula, it might not be possible. And if it is, you're not going to be able to tell the full life story. You're going to be able to maybe cast a laser focus on one or two aspects of that person's character and then draw from that the kinds of stories that might illuminate those traits, however problematic or triumphant they may be. You just can't say, I'm going to touch on every single momentous moment in this person's life, and the purpose of this film is merely going to be to march through all of that, and then we get to the end credits, and there you go. You've got Amy Winehouse's story. What do you want? I mean, we got to all of it, didn't we? All the stuff that you used to read about in the tabloids when she was still alive? Is that really the point? I used the verb reveal earlier. Revelation should be the point. Digging deeper. Tell me something we didn't read in some UK tabloid 15 years ago. I'm spending a lot of money on movie tickets these days to merely be told what I already know. How lazy. I don't know what more to say. Another Oscar Goff of the Boston Hassle, another film critic, says Back to Black challenges neither our perceptions of its subject nor the conventions of its genre, and is ultimately barely less tawdry than the paparazzi that hounded her to her grave. Peter Travers of ABC News calls it sanitized and superficial. There's that family's influence again showing itself. Coleman Spildy, sorry if I'm getting your name wrong, Coleman, in the Daily Beast said, the film struggles to say much about the iconic late singer that hasn't already been mused on by her millions of fans. Right. Another film critic for Screen Rant said Back to Black is the worst type of biopic, one that made me feel little and offers next to nothing truly personal about the singer or her inner life. Christopher Llewellyn of Rita Film Festival Today says, how could so many people be so inept? Winehouse deserved far better. Yes, how could so many people be so inept? How can, again, a town like Hollywood that is supposed to be replete with talented storytellers, some of whom make a killing doing what they do. They're well paid because they're supposed to be great at their jobs, right? How are they getting it so wrong so frequently these days? And now they're going to be churning out all these biopics about these even greater artists. I mean, Winehouse herself wouldn't contend with the notion that guys like Bob Dylan and Michael Jackson were even bigger than she was. And in this environment, these biopics are going to be coming out. I shudder at the thought at this point. But I will say this. Marisa Abela's performance as Amy Winehouse is fantastic. And maybe this is how you can still enjoy Back to Black. If you just go into the movie theater only wanting to appreciate the talent and the grit and the study that Abela brings to her performance, you will consider that, I think, to be worth the price of admission. At the very beginning, the way she talks, her voice, she sounds like Amy Winehouse. The accent, she nails it. She doesn't look a lot like Amy Winehouse, and that's sort of a superficial dissimilarity between herself and the character she portrays. But there are a couple moments here that really speak to a talent in Marisa Abela that I think is only seeing its beginning in Hollywood. Primary among them is this moment when she visits Blake in prison. Blake has been jailed prior to her winning the 5 Grammys, right? The 5 Grammy Awards. And she visits him, and it's a very troubled meeting with him. And he tells her he wants a divorce, and I think he tells her he's going back to Becky, or was that a different scene? But he tells her he doesn't want to have anything to do with her anymore. He claims that he's gotten cleaned up in prison. He's not cutting himself anymore. He's blaming her for all of his problems, which is absurdly childish, of course. She was not the cause. He brought plenty of problems with him long before he met her. But this is a difficult moment in Amy Winehouse's life. And when the next scene appears and you see the dreary brick, thick, tall, towering brick and barbed wire laden walls of the prison, and there's Amy Winehouse walking away from it with these sort of, this disturbed gait, the halting and staggered steps of a tortured woman tiptoeing to her own doom. It's brilliant stuff from her, and she says nothing. She says this with her body, and that is some serious talent. You could also tell, speaking of saying things with her body, that she did a lot of work studying Amy Winehouse's mannerisms on stage and her presence on stage, and absolutely nails it. In every scene in which she's just singing and doing her thing on stage, she is Amy Winehouse. This is a great talent handcuffed by a totally mediocre treatment of the subject. Some of the things that more specifically made Back to Black a disappointing experience for me are its rushed pace. I mean, 20 minutes into the film, she already has her record deal with Island. We've learned almost nothing about her personally at that point, beyond her affection for iconic female jazz singers like Sarah Vaughan and Dinah Washington and Etta Fitzgerald, turbulence between her parents. We've learned that she apparently has this fierce resistance to being perceived or packaged as a pop star. There's a great moment when a guy from a record label is calling to represent her, from this label 19, or is it an agency? I guess it represents the Spice Girls, and she tells him, "I'm not a Spice Girl." It's a good scene in there. There you go. I mean, it reveals a little bit about her authenticity, but in a very rushed manner. And then it's on to the next thing that happened in her life, on to the next moment in the highlight reel of this film's treatment of her story. Then in comes her boyfriend Blake, like 10 minutes later. Okay, so got the record deal out of the way. Now got to get to the boyfriend, and here he comes, and he appears in this pub, and of course she's instantly smitten with him to suit the narrative's convenience and expediency. There isn't much depth to the film's exploration of Winehouse's attraction to Blake. It's bizarre. One wonders what it was about this pub crawling nobody that Amy Winehouse found to be so irresistible, except for her own furious resistance to being perceived as a fame-seeking person, someone who seeks celebrity. She seemed to be very sensitive to that. The film doesn't do as much to make that apparent as do the interviews with Winehouse that you yourself can find on YouTube. You might come to a better understanding of Amy Winehouse just pulling up YouTube clips and going to this movie and come to think of it. So, it just feels like the film needs Winehouse to fall madly in love with Blake on the spot, because that's all the film has time for. She falls in love and gets burned by Blake all in one tidily arranged scene, and then the film gets on with things quickly from there. Becky, his girlfriend, emerges stunned, devastated that he has anything to do with her, and then he leaves with her, and Winehouse is devastated. She then, in the very next scene, learns her aunt has lung cancer, and then in the scene right after that, in the most cliche moment, movie trope imaginable, after learning that devastating news of her aunt's cancer, you see Amy Winehouse getting drunk, drinking from a bottle in the street, walking through the rain with mascara, of course, dripping down her face, to the pub where she met Blake. She walks into the pub, and of course he's right there, just happens to be sitting there at that very moment. She pulls him in for this passionate impromptu kiss. Out pops Becky again to perform the role of the devastated third wheel or jilted lover. All on the spot, all again in this tidily arranged scene to just pow, pow, pow. Let's get to, in this very impatient manner, let's just blast the audience with all of the most obvious problems and tensions that existed in this woman's life, and just rush on from there. They end up in a hotel room having sex in the next scene, and then in the next scene, of course, he's snorting blow in front of her, because we got to get to Blake the drug addict and that next layer in the imminent doom that awaited Amy Winehouse, right? The film doesn't trust its audience to have much patience with its story. This is the signature of mediocre or just plain bad biopics about great musicians and songwriters. Bad art is art that doesn't trust its audience. Bad art is art that isn't smart enough to know how to trust its audience. And it's for this reason that this film, Back to Black, plays out at the pace of a commercial. Just cram as much information as you can into as short a duration of time as possible, meanwhile losing sight of the human being at the heart of the story. And what a fascinating, complex, doomed, tormented, and brilliantly talented and beautiful human being that was. The result is this unrelentingly superficial, frenzied rush through the tabloid lowlights of this creative genius's life. Listen, if the film's commendable for anything, and this will come off as snarky, but I mean it, it's the discipline with which it shies away at every turn from ever scratching the surface of the origins and substance underlying the inner turmoil that found its expression in Amy Winehouse's brilliant songwriting. That's truly an astonishing feat. It really took some stick-to-itiveness to pull that off for the duration of a couple hours, to just constantly, over the course of 120 minutes, run away from everything that was even remotely complex about this woman. How they pulled that off is a marvel. The film, lastly, it serves up these tragic glimpses of its own understanding of Winehouse's authenticity, which is all the more maddening for its failure to explore that dimension of her character with any depth. There's a scene where I think it's Blake that she's telling How she loves Charles Bukowski, she loves Hunter S. Thompson. These writers who, and I noted this quote as she said it, people who can show you how effing ugly life is. So the filmmakers understood the honesty and rawness that Amy Winehouse was about. Where is any of that in the film itself? What happened there? How does this disconnect keep happening in these biopics that Hollywood churns out about great musicians? Instead, as my sister said, I went to see it with her, so this is from a female perspective. Take it from her. She said, we get this weepy version of Amy Winehouse that seems to reduce much of her complexity down to an obsession with this pub-crawling nobody, Blake. What utter nonsense. I'm sorry, but that dude merely dropped himself into the whitewater rapids of a tormented soul that had accumulated its torments long before his entry into her life. Her inner turbulence preceded Blake and had little to do with him. And for this movie to seem to go out of its way to suggest that he had such an influence on the origins of her torment is preposterous. There was so much left on the table with Back to Black. And the bigger point of saying all of this is that Hollywood might need to hit the pause button on these music biopics and really do some soul searching and think about why it has this compulsion to churn these things out at a factory-like pace. It's in this way that Hollywood exposes itself to the criticism that I shared in my last video about the Amy Winehouse biopic, again, only when the trailer had come out a few months ago, that the objective is to sensationalize someone's demise for the purpose of financial gain. I don't like hearing myself say that. I don't like espousing that degree of cynicism. But I'm sorry, at this point, I don't see what other motive there is for Hollywood to continue doing this. My hope is that somehow they will either just stop it, cut it out for a couple years, and remind yourselves how a mere 20 years ago, when Ray and Walk the Line came out, you knew how to do it with at least competency, if not some moving power. Joaquin Phoenix as Johnny Cash was brilliant. Jamie Foxx as Ray was brilliant. What has happened since then? Sam Riley in 2007 as Ian Curtis was really, really well done. But man, Elvis, Whitney Houston, now Amy Winehouse, biopic after biopic just falling so far short of the dignity that these people earned with their talent, with their work ethic, with their impact. It's sorrowful, and we'll see how these other biopics turn out, but at this point, I'm not holding out hope. See what you think. I mean, you go watch Back to Black. You tell me that you saw something bigger and greater in the film. I'll be open to that. I'd love to hear from you. But for my money, yikes.